Welcome to another edition of Major League Minor. I'm your host, Chris Dotson. We're going to talk about the XFL, CFL, WXFL, and the Oklahoma City Bounty Hunters in this edition. First, let's go ahead and start with the XFL. To recap last week's scores, we saw the Wichita Zombie Assassins travel to Oklahoma City to take on the Jaguars. The Assassins took care of business really easily and came away with a score of 28-7. The Wichita Zombie Assassins being two teams merging, one from the XFL, one from the CFL, to make a quote-unquote super team. These guys are fairly competitive, not too bad this year actually, especially for trying to merge two teams with two different sets of players and two different coaching philosophies. Next up, we saw the Northern Oklahoma Bulldogs take on the Oklahoma Chargers. Now this was a game that really helped out for both teams in a regard that they needed to find out where they were and how they're going to look in the playoffs. The Northern Oklahoma Bulldogs had a little bit of a slump but came back, and by a score of 20-8, I think they're making a good contention for the playoffs. The Chargers, however, they're kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde team. You just never know who's going to show up from week to week. Next up, we saw the Oklahoma City Bulls travel up to Tulsa to take on the Oklahoma Monarchs. The Monarchs, another first-year team that's really surprised a lot of us. Veteran players, veteran coaching staff, and a good philosophy have really made these guys number 2 in the XFL. By a score of 29-0, they really took care of business. Now the Kansas Cougars had a bye week because they got a forfeit from the Yukon Bobcats. The Bobcats had announced earlier in the week that they are dropping out for the remaining part of the season, if you will, due to lack of participation. They had some players go, and then they've had some key injuries. For a first-year team, though, they really didn't stop until they really had to. I've been on a team like that, and it's no fun, but these guys really have some gumption and have announced that they're looking forward to coming back next season and are looking to rebuild during the offseason. Now going right into rankings, no surprise, the 5-0 Kansas Cougars is number 1. Number 2 coming in at 5-1, the Oklahoma Monarchs, followed by the Northern Oklahoma Bulldogs, the Oklahoma Chargers, the Oklahoma City Bulls, the Wichita Zombie Assassins, the Oklahoma City Jaguars, and finally, the Yukon Bobcats. Now we're going to talk about this week's predictions. This week we're going to see the Oklahoma City Bulls take on the Oklahoma Chargers. I think the Chargers are going to redeem themselves this week, and by a score of 21-7 is my prediction. I think it'll go into the third quarter and then they'll start pulling away. Next up, we're going to see the Battle of Wichita. The Kansas Cougars are going to take on the Wichita Zombie Assassins. I think the Cougars are going to have this one real easy. It's going to be cake for them by a score of 35-7. Next up, we're going to see the Oklahoma City Jaguars travel up to Ponca City to take on the Northern Oklahoma Bulldogs. Now, this being the last, quote-unquote, last week for the XFL, honestly, there's one game scheduled next week, but this is really the end of the regular season for a lot of these guys. This one's going to be a score of 21-7 in my prediction, the Northern Oklahoma Bulldogs making a case for the playoffs. Now, we're going to talk about the WXFL. The girls came out, and boy, I'll tell you what, last week we saw a great game. If you were actually there to see it, you saw a great defensive stand and battle between both of these teams. The Oklahoma City Lady Force really came away with 7 points, the only scored points that there are in the whole game, including in overtime. That's not to take anything away from the Kansas Lady Cougars, who honestly both teams have been wiping out the other competitors throughout the season. These two teams are going to meet up in the championship, and I can guarantee it. That's my lock right there. Next up, we saw the Enid Lady Enforcers. They took care of business with the Kansas City Storm by a score of 48-26. Now, we're going to talk about of course, their rankings right now, with the Oklahoma City Lady Force as number 1, no surprise there, followed by number 2, the Kansas Lady Cougars, finishing out the Enid Lady Enforcers, followed by the Northern Oklahoma Extreme, and then, of course, the Kansas City Storm. Now, last week was the last final regular season play for the WXFL. They have a week off this week, and then going into next week, we'll start seeing about the playoffs and how they're going to round up. We do know, however, that the Oklahoma City Force will be off that week, and they really need it because they took some key injuries, about 3 key injuries from that last game against the Cougars. Now, coming right back, we're going to talk about the CFL and what's going on with the Oklahoma City Bounty Hunters right after this.
Firefighters were able to contain the fire to a laundry room just after 10 a.m., but heat and heavy smoke filled 2 apartments, and now those residents say they're left with nothing.
The building is on fire, fire. The building is on fire, fire. Yeah, we bounce. Let's go. My friend came to the door. Well, I was on the phone cooking me and my baby some breakfast. And she said, "Oh Lord Jesus, it's a fire. Let's go." I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "No, we ain't gonna be no fire. Not today. The building is on fire, fire." I said, "No, what?" The building is on fire, fire. Ain't nobody got time for this. Girl come downstairs. She come out her apartment with her baby with no shoes. No shoes or nothing. Girl